It's a beautiful song. It's a beautiful idea. And even like in the word defer, right? It doesn't mean that it's gone. It just means that it's like held over or carried over, which I think is nice. It's a nice idea to imagine carrying something the same way we would carry our children in our wombs or on our backs, in our arms, you know.
What happens to it? What happens to a dream deferred? Does it fester like a sore and then run? What happens to it? What happens to a dream deferred? What happens to a dream deferred?
Yeah, it's been such a like thing since having my first. And then I thought I was kind of out of it, you know, because my two older ones are a lot older. And so I'd moved through that like busyness that the young ones bring to your life and into this like different stage. And so it wasn't deferred anymore. It'd come back. And then I had two more.
I've got dreams.
I think the worry is always that it's gone. That once you enter into this new version of yourself, because you're never going to be the same again after you have children, like that person is actually what's gone. But the dreams and the goals and the art making doesn't have to be gone. It's just different, right? Like before I had kids, it's interesting. I always wrote about my mother and her stories and her narratives and my like, you know, sense of disconnect from Scotland and from her homeland and my family's homeland. And then I had my own children and suddenly my narratives took the forefront. And I was able to write about my identity as a mother in relation to children who I have things I want to pass on to them. And so it changed how I made art. But I had a long time when I first had my first, especially. I was so young, as I know you know. I didn't do a lot of writing and making, but I was still writing and making. And in that time, I didn't realize that, only to get out of the other side and realize, like, I did some serious making. I grew humans. I created paradigms. You know, environments. I was doing this like incredible creation, and it helped me sort of like shift how I defined art as well, which also I think kind of pushed me out of seeking like traditional forms of publishing or of art making, and let me be in community and realizing that in community art, children, they belong more than they do in this kind of traditional art space.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another moment. I'm your host, the Lady Dia Melodia, talking to all the lovers, mothers, sinners, drinkers, sobers, and just everybody out there. You are listening to Erin Scott, artist, superstar, and mother.
They belong in those spaces, you know, in ways that I think a lot of people don't think they do. It's like the artist Tanya Willard. She teaches up at UBC, and her big thing is called Bush Gallery. And it's the idea that in the bush, children belong. And so if you put an art gallery in the bush, guess what? Kids and all types of people are going to engage totally differently with the art than they would if it's in the alternator downtown, right? And so how do we shift our idea and relationship to art? And that's like deferring it, right? It's like you've got two roads and one just takes you on a different path, but it doesn't mean that the path is gone. It just might not be like a typically walked path. So you gotta like tread through some deep grass for a little bit.
I've got dreams, I've got life.
But I want to work through the discomfort. I want them to grow up just totally engrossed in art and in their mother as an artist, that's something that's also available to them, right? Even just watching you sit there and Glory singing to you, he's embedded in it. He knows that this is something he can share with you. That's like the real power of being a mother and an artist at the same time, you know? He's going to have a head start over all of us, right? That's what Cole and I joke about, these kids who have like artist parents and they're like, oh yeah, I had my first gallery showing at 17. It's like, yeah, I would have too if my mom didn't work in insurance, you know? Like, well, you're an artist, so your child should like go over there while you're doing your art thing for 8 hours a day. And then you come home and then you get to be mom. It's like, well, what happens if you don't? I like discovered this thing when I was in my early parenting journey with Lennon. And Lennon, my oldest, is still to this day my most challenging. She's like just a little spitfire, you know? And so I couldn't really make a lot in that time, and I felt like maybe motherhood wasn't that interesting. All the art I had seen and been taught through my schooling, there weren't narratives around motherhood that were upheld and awarded as valuable. And then I discovered this visual artist who created what she called a residency in motherhood. And instead of having to like go somewhere to do a residency that you would make all this art, she did it right in her every day of mothering. And so some of the things she did were like photographs of 65 things I pulled out of my toddler's mouth. And there are all these photographs of all these little items that she's pulled out of his mouth. And it's so cool. It's beautiful, right? One of them is a video, and it's like, how far can my toddler be away from me before we feel that we have to come back together? So it's them out in fields and the toddler taken off before suddenly there's this realization like the tether's too tight or something and has to return. And so I started trying to embody that, and she's got a whole website, you should look it up, and calls to mothers to enact their own residencies in motherhood. So like, how are we making while breastfeeding and making the dinners and taking them to the park? Like, what does that look like, you know?
That's how Moments was sparked, because it's just a mom moment.
Yeah.
Right? And I was just doing something and I felt like I'm like, moment. It's a moment. You know, because that documentation, and that's so funny that you say documentation, because I was writing today on the Facebook page and I was just like, I'm documenting, like, because there was a lesson that I was taught today, and it was just like, this mother my friend, she just had her baby.
Yeah.
And I think it's like day 3 or the first week. And she's like, I'm not sleeping. The baby loves sleeping in the day and not sleeping at night. And she is the person that can't sleep in the day. Right. And then somebody was like, well, did you pray about it? Or did you why don't you just pray about it? And anyway, so they prayed. And the baby just switched. Right. And then she just ended it by saying, sometimes we just need to ask. Yeah. And it got me thinking about asking, because sometimes I have a hard time asking outside for help. Yeah. But sometimes you have to ask outside. Sometimes you have to ask yourself something. Yeah. And then sometimes you just ask, the creator, Mulimu. Yeah. And it's just like, even with the asking, you are documenting that process. Yeah. You're documenting just different things. So I love that. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, you talked about Scotland, right? Mm-hmm. So that is where your mother is from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mom's a Scottish immigrant. She immigrated from Scotland at 21. She came over here by herself and never went back. So she's the only one. So all of my family are still in Scotland on her side. Oh, wow. Yeah, and we trace all the way back to the Outer Hebrides, which is like northernmost part of Scotland. They're a series of tiny islands, but they were heavily colonized by the English. So they were Gaelic speakers. They were indigenous Scottish people, right? And so that's our line. So there's this like deep calling for me to that land and that language. I'm trying. Mackenzie, she's named Mackenzie because we come from Clan Mackenzie, and the clans in Scotland have all kinds of branch names and then different surnames that fall within that clan. And your clan has a certain tartan that you wear and all kinds of stuff. So she's Mackenzie because of that, and so she has this kinship to this Scottish thing. So our thing is we're using Duolingo and we're learning Gaelic. We've committed to reclaiming our language. So, but man, it's got some intense like glottal sounds. I'm like, I don't know how to make that sound, like it's wild. So yeah, but yeah, that's a big part of kind of my family and my identity.
You're listening to Moments with Erin Scott.
It's nice that my mom is around, so she's kind of our source. Yes. So I actually recently have been one of the projects I want to undertake is interviewing her. Like both my grandparents died within a year of each other, back right around my early 20s when I had Lennon. And Lennon is a Gaelic name as well. And so I didn't really have the ability to access these stories and this history, and so as I age, I'm like, I gotta get this stuff before it's gone, and we're just like little Canadians who don't know shit, So I'm gonna start trying to kind of interview her and gather and collect stories and maybe do some research type work that could help me maybe go over there and find the family, find the clan. And
your mother speaks Gaelic?
My mom doesn't speak. She knows about 8 Gaelic words herself, but her grandmother, my great-grandmother, was the last Gaelic speaker on either of our lines. Jessie Ann was her name. And they were from Stornoway, which is up in the Outer Hebrides. But once everybody kind of came down out of the Hebrides, they're not really populated anymore and started living in the cities. Gaelic just got assimilated out, and everybody was expected to speak English. And Scottish Gaelic actually has been eradicated even more than Irish Gaelic. There's still a lot of Irish Gaelic in Ireland. They've managed to resist England better than I think Scotland did. So it's hard, for even my Scottish cousins. They don't know any Gaelic, even though they live on the land and are over there, right? I always knew my mom was different. Everybody, had these calm and quiet Canadian mothers, and that was not my mother. And so I could recognize there were differences starting very young, and then when I started writing, her stories were just more interesting than everybody else's stories, and so I wanted to kind of gather them and the words she used. And she messaged me the other day and she says, oh, maybe I'll come over for a wee little visit, stuff like that, right? And she still has an accent, and so it's it's a part. Cole bugs me that I say a lot of words with an accent that I never realized. But when you grow up with a parent who speaks a certain way, it's inevitable, right? Yeah, it becomes a part of how you, yeah. So I would love to kind of have some kind of art project that revolves around this reclamation and relearning and involving my girls in it. The boys as well, but they're so young that they'll get there.
Pardon me. I forgot to ask Erin to introduce herself, but technically, this episode is an introduction in itself. So yeah, I'm gonna just skip right on over to Erin Scott talking about Atrophy. That's her poetry book.
Atrophy is a journey poem. It's and so there's a lot of landscape, and a lot of land is a big part of it. And so it chronicles a road trip from Kelowna down to San Luis Obispo, which is kind of just north of Los Angeles, and then back again. And I had originally made that trip years ago with my first husband, and it was when we were leaving Kelowna to move to LA. And then I made the same trip years later after being divorced and with a new partner, and we had just miscarried. And so we were like carrying this weight of this dead baby with us. And I'd never gone through that before. And so a lot of it is about loss, but it has a lot of my mom and Scotland in there, and of this sense of like what's lost when we leave regions or land or culture, and how does that live within us even after death. So it's kind of this like journey, and there's lots in it about the kids, and yeah. So it started as a long poem that I then like shredded and kept only small pieces of it, but I had all of these other poems in this greater collection, and suddenly realized that like half of what I thought were other poems actually just belonged to Atrophy. And it took me a while, like 3 years, to see that they actually just all belonged to one another. And I was working through all of these ideas, but I was putting them in 5 different locations, when what I needed to do was to like silence a lot of the noise and just let them live and exist together. But again, like I always have this fear that if I'm writing about my children or motherhood, that it's boring and that people don't give a shit, and they want to like, they want to write about big world issues and political issues or male-dominated issues. And so I when I try to write like that, it's terrible. It's so boring and bad. It's not who I am, right? So when I kind of finally like let that go, I decided that the poems could be something great. And I was doing a little bit of an exercise trying to. There was this song lyric in which the lyricist says that you can't see air and time. And I kept thinking it through, and I was like, you can see air and time. And this is how you can see air and time. So the first poem, that's what it's trying to do, is how do we see air and how do we see time? Everywhere, right? So then it became an exercise of like, what does it mean? Those things are, we're constantly losing them and moving through them, but they're also always around us. And so it kind of became this sort of really easy analogy for this like loss that I was going through at that time, and then contemplating what it meant to move on from things, to move on from my first husband, for my mother to move on from the land that she'd known in her genes and her blood for centuries, to come to this new land and start fresh. And then what does that mean for me as a woman and a person and a Scottish, descendant and all that kind of stuff.
So you have a deep understanding of land. How does that like connect you with like Silic people or Indigenous people here? Like how do you also like bring your children into that kind of understanding of that relationship?
I think like it actually was what I did during my undergrad. I did my minor in Indigenous Studies, and so I was working really intensely with people like Greg Younging and Tirso Gonzalez, and I was becoming really, really active in a lot of Indigenous land rights here for the Syilx Okanagan peoples, and kind of almost like imposed that identity onto myself in my lacking of connection to my own land and people and culture. And it was Margot Temes who said to me one day, like, what if you reclaimed your own identity? what would that look like, And she just kept saying, all this work that you put out, it's so clear that you are missing and longing for your land and your language, your culture, all of these things that you don't have, the same way that so many Silk people don't have. And so it was sort of this like really insanely revealing moment for me that I could participate in identifying myself with Silk people through my own reclamation, that I didn't need to be Silk to reclaim something. And so that's been a really incredible thing for me to kind of be able to, and Marielle is kind of been somebody we've collaborated on stuff as well, because her dad is Scottish too, right? French and Scottish. And so we've talked through a lot of that. She even laughs. She's like, Gaelic and Insilchin sound super similar to each other. They have this like glottal, like deep sound to them that are it's so hard to make when you don't speak it. But yeah, so for me, it's about how do we uphold the lands that we live on while not trying to overstep and take on those journeys and those pathways that don't belong to us. But there's some belonging, but it's in a different kind of arena or realm or whatever, if that kind of makes sense. So for me, it's about making sure that my girls and myself stay connected to the land that we're on right now, that we call home, while making sure that we're also putting the work in to heal our own wounds and our own challenges and problems, which I think is a lot of what settler white people are struggling with, is their own disconnect and their own lack of land and sense of culture. But there's this sort of idea like, well, I'm Canadian. Are you? What does that mean exactly? And how many generations back can you go and still lay claim to that? So that's been an interesting kind of like shift in my like activism. And I think about it too. There was a while there where I said to Marielle, I'm going to learn a bunch of Insilchin, and then I'll be able to, at events that I do, give my land acknowledgement in Insilchin, because I think that's my responsibility. And she was like, why don't you learn Gaelic first? Like, isn't that going to be more relevant to you, to who you are as a person? And I hadn't really felt like I'd been given permission to do that before in this way, that a lot of like really great, Indigenous woman poet creators kind of pushed me in that direction. So it's been awesome. Yeah. Well, that's like such a big part of any Indigenous paradigm, right? Is story. And I've always been so drawn to story. I love telling stories. My mom's a great storyteller. And like I said, she had all these stories of this land and this place that was, until I was 10 or something, I'd never even stepped foot there before. And so I knew that story had held some value. And, Scottish Gaelic history is oral as well. They loved the oral storytelling. There was no writing. There was people sitting around and reciting. Poetry is such a Scottish tradition that it doesn't surprise me as I learn more about my own people and culture that this is where I've ended up. It's like, yeah, no but it took people like Marielle and Margot and even Greg who kind of said, look, there's something here for you. And it might not be about the silk culture, but that can be maybe a stepping stone. It can be an invitation for you to know about how Indigenous paradigms work and reclaim your own history and ancestry and things that were taken through the exact same process of colonization,
Can you please just read from me the part where it talks about the hawk and the hullabaloo?
Oh, what's funny about that? That section is one of my favorite sections. But they printed it wrong. And it worked out in this like super exciting way where the line actually goes at the end. It's supposed to say, and how sometimes it's all about the vantage point, but they took out the vantage point by accident because this is printed by hand, right, on a letterpress machine. So they literally put in every single letter and then have to like print it. It's like a little work of art, but it looks like it's on purpose. Like I've made some poignant point, but then I just don't say the point. So when they printed it, I was like, oh my God, that edit's really, it's a mistake, but it's really good. That's good. So I love it. But this piece was written about the very first time I made that trip. And I knew deep in my soul that this man was not the man I was supposed to be with. And we had only just been married. We got married because we were moving to California. And in California, they don't have common law. So me and Lennon would not have been allowed in the country if James and I weren't legally married. So we had a wedding in a week in somebody's backyard. But it was very like pragmatic, like we have to do this. And I was this young woman who was like, I don't think I really want to be with this man for the rest of my life. Like, what am I doing? And then I was pregnant again. On the trip down, we found out that I was pregnant again. And it was like, with my second. Yeah.
What is their age difference?
They're 2 years apart.
And 2 years apart.
Yeah. So it was kind of this like, the road trip was sort of me moving away from what I knew and who I thought I was into this new version of myself, in which I really struggled in Los Angeles. I was like, just in a concrete jungle and totally isolated from family and friends. And he worked all the time. He was in the video game industry, and it was like, you will give us your life, and that's that. And so I was just alone with 2 children all of the time. So this like section was kind of this like moment of like, I don't know, looking out over the ocean in Eureka, California, and being like, what the have I done, But knowing that was just the beginning of my journey. And it's kind of wild because my mother, in all of her knowledge, says that she like knew before I knew. She's like, I was waiting for you to come to me and tell me you were leaving James. I was like, why didn't you tell me? Like, you're just keeping that from me? Like, oh, well, she'll figure it out eventually. But as mothers, maybe that's what we do, And so she's very good at sitting there and watching with this blue-eyed intensity of like, you'll figure it out. And you're like, Mom, help me. Stop, But she's tough. Scottish people are very tough. So there's a bit of like tough love is the nature of the beast. But this is section 2 of Air. So section 2. In Eureka, no one sleeps. And it isn't because the hotel faces the 101 highway or because we lost our way earlier and strained our throats shouting, but that the hawk keeps showing up. You said it had this way of following you to the playground and squabbling with the children about dumb shit, Like whose turn it was on the helter-skelter or the best way to stalk the field mouse. And no one knew what I was doing. At the Best Western, when I walked out to the balcony at 4 a.m. and stood at the edge, naked and resting against the metal railing. But the hawk knew. About perching above the hullabaloo, and how sometimes it's all about the vantage point.
You're listening to Moments with Erin Scott.
A helter-skelter is the Scottish word for a slide. Oh. Yeah, so that's why there's that like Beatles song called Helter-Skelter. And that's what it's about, it's going down the slide. So there's a lot of that throughout where... So that's like when, you said it had this way of following you to the playground. The you there is my mother. Squabbling with the children about dumb shit, Like whose turn it was on the helter-skelter. But the hawk is throughout the book and throughout a lot of my work as well, because hawks are all over Scotland, but they're all over the Okanagan. So I find all of these like parallels between Scottish geography and nature and land and the Okanagan land as well, which I think is a part of why I've lived lots of places in Canada and always felt like I didn't belong, and I felt a belonging when I moved up here. And it's all these like craggy rocks, and there's just something about it that feels and reminds me of Scotland. So there's a lot of these kind of parallels throughout the book that are sort of, connecting my mother's own journey of immigrating and my process of moving from Canada down to the Okanagan or to LA, and yeah, there's lots. And then this tiny little death of this little baby that never got to be.
That must have been so hard.
Yeah, it was tough. It was like, it was a kind of one of those that was kind of what led to Cole and I having babies, was that like we got pregnant and then miscarried, and I really thought I was done having kids. And so when we lost this baby, it was like, am I done? Like, am I supposed to have babies with this man? Like, what does that mean to have babies with more than one man? And what is going on? And how will I balance all of that? So after we kind of, dealt with that loss, we started trying again. And then we had Cedar, and then we thought we were done with Cedar, and Heath came along. Yeah. And Heath comes from the name Heather, and Heather is a flower that's all over the hills of Scotland. Yeah, and it's my middle name and my aunt's name. So it's kind of this like family. He's my namesake. It's like none of this naming babies after their daddies. This one's mine,
You're listening to Moments with Erin Scott.
My oldest is Lennon Zena, and she's 10. And then there's Mackenzie Joan, and she's 8. Cedar Owen is 1.5, and then Heath River Zane is 3 months. Yeah. It's wild. 4 of them is a lot. When we're all in a room together, I'm like, oh my God, you're so loud. You all need to shut up. So it's kind of wild, but it's a blessing. There's some kind of knowing though, because I always used to say that after I had the girls, that what I actually wanted was 4 babies, and I wanted 2 girls and 2 boys. And so again, if you ask, it will come. You be careful what you put out there into the world.
I'm looking at trophies because I low-key really want 4 children.
Yeah.
But the one, I'm like,
yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to ask you. Like, because this is my time to really know. I'm talking to the woman. I've wanted 4 children. So tell me, with your dreams, are you going to defer? Where are you right now with that?
I surrender to my babies. That's like really important to me. So I accept that I might not be making in the same way that I would like to be, but I also have older children who don't want to spend any time with me. So I know that time will come back. So it's really hard with your first because you don't know. You don't know what that next step is. Whereas with the 4th, it's like, oh, he's going to grow up. He's going to grow up really, really fast. And then he's going to be 10 and he's going to be rolling his eyes at me and thinking I don't know anything and saying drip about everything. Everything's drip. Drip. I'm like, what? The other day we had to say to Lennon, like, what does drip mean? What does that mean? She's like, Mom, it's when things are like expensive, okay? Like, get with it. Drip. Yeah. So yeah, I know. No. See, you're old now, Dia. You're old. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, so I had when I had Lennon, I had a couple of women in some of my final classes for my undergraduate who were like grandma age, and they said to me, take the time with your kids. You will never regret it. You'll never regret it. And that was really hard for me at first because I was in such a place of immense momentum with my art making when I got pregnant with Lennon. And I really, really struggled to accept that so much of my energy was going towards her instead of my very first baby, which was my art practice. But I don't regret it. I don't regret slowing down. I don't regret having less output now. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But what I do know is that where I am as a mother now, my ability is way higher. So, you know, I'm able to still find time to do writing and to be teaching. Randy and I are doing teaching with the youths. Didn't know that? Yeah.
I told you about the French workshop.
Man, sometimes Randy, I don't know what's the truth and what's not. This guy.
But so, you know, and that's been amazing. The youth are so cool. Some of the stuff they come up with. But so anyways, I feel like I'm in less of a deferred state with 4 children than I was with 1. Which seems really wild because you would think it would go the other way, but I am a veteran. I've been a mama for 10 years. Like, I know the ropes now. So when little baby won't go to sleep and is gassy and has stuff going on, I can identify that right away and know we're going to have a couple bad days. I'm not going to be able to get to sitting down to write, but maybe in 3 days I will. With Lennon, it was like, I'm never going to write again. I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life every second. And the truth is that they grow up. And they grow up real fast. Cole and I were talking about it. Suddenly they're older and they have their own lives. Like Lennon's out there on her cell phone TikToking and hanging out with buddies, and we're like second par to her compared to this age where they're like, you're their shining light. So you got to soak that shit up while it lasts. This is what I learned, is that I think that it's totally okay for people to have one child because that's their capacity. Yeah. And that's all they want to do. They want that one child to grow up and then they immediately get back to their stuff. When you restart that process, you go back.
Oh, so
it's like this, right? It's this dance of like 8 steps forward and then 4 steps backwards and then 2 steps forward, and you're dancing the whole way, right? But for me, I learned that I love having kids. And if I had like a ton of family and people, I would have 8 children.
Yeah, right.
Like the babies. Oh my God, the babies, you know? And Heath is the most divine baby you'll ever meet. He sleeps all night. He's 3 months old, you guys. And he's breastfed. I wake up in the night, I'm like, he's dead! He's dead! Somebody check on the baby! And he's just laying there like, sleep is great. Yeah, I don't know who he is.
So how do you guys, how do you guys find that time for you to do your thing and for Cole to do?
I think that him being an artist actually makes it easier because he understands how valuable it is to me. Whereas my first partner was creative, but still very much working kind of in the business world of like making video games. And so his was like a 9-to-5 type of relationship to his creativity as opposed to being an artist where it's an all the time, it never leaves, you know? And so I think Cole and I are really willing to grant each other that space and to fight for that space for one another. You know, when I finished Atrophy when I was at Banff for a 5-week residency, and I was pregnant with Cedar, and it was the first time I'd left the girls ever, really. And it was 5 weeks. And Lennon was hilarious. Lennon said to me, like, why are you going? She says, what will you even get from this? I was like, excuse me, you know? But it was that kind of learning moment for Lennon of like, what I will get is for me as a person. And I am your mother, but I am also a person. And so Cole just like stepped up, and they're his like, you know, step babies, and he still took on 5 weeks alone. Him and James, you know, my 2 baby daddies took it on so I could go and be at Banff for 5 weeks. Yeah, so I do find that we make that space for one another. And then I'm sure, as you guys probably find too, like the art talk never goes away. It's one of my favorite things about my relationship with Cole, is that he's also an artist. And so we just like, we really inspire one another. And he has a chapbook that's coming out actually with Broke Press, which is a kind of small independent chapbook press in the Okanagan. And I hadn't really read much of it until it got accepted, and then he sent it to me and I read through it, and it echoes a lot of atrophy. He's talking about loss and a lot of these really personal things as well. And so it's this beautiful thing to like have some kind of like call and response that is both about your life but also about your art. It's like, what a gift. And it's funny, actually, my ex, who I still am close with, I've known him since I was 14 years old. When Cole and I got together and got serious, James said to me one day, like, well, you did it. You finally got your poet. Yeah. So I think it works well for us, actually, as opposed to, I think, people who aren't necessarily as inclined towards art as a career or a part of who you are. It's hard for them to see the value. It's kind of like, well, this doesn't really make much money. And it's not like looking after the kids. It's not like, what is it doing, right? That like big question, what does art do? But when you're an artist, you know what art does. Yes. You know, you will shrivel up and die if you don't do it. So you gotta like keep making, even if that's singing songs while you're breastfeeding, even if it's like, you know, reading a poem in the backyard or whatever. Like, it all, I think, still has value. And so I'm trying, Cole and I talk about this a lot, trying to like let work that you've put a lot of effort into be what it is without constantly changing it as you go, and just accepting like this is like a little time capsule. Yes. of me in that moment and me at that time in my life. So I'm there's a middle section that actually is also going to be published with Broke Press in November. That'll be a little chapbook. And then I'm working on the final section right now, and it's going to be called Children of the Pandemic. And so it's sort of much more like jovial and humorous. I find sometimes like this like performer version of Erin is very fun and like catty, and humor like is king. And then I get into writing things for the page and I get serious and I'm like, get over yourself. Yeah. What is this? But I'm trying to write like everybody that I've been taught to write like, and that's not who I am, right? So I'm trying to bring that back into this, and into this like manuscript. Let this, even if like no publishing house picks it up, it still will be something that I can feel positive about. And these little weird children of the pandemic, man, they do and say hilarious things.
What happens to a dream deferred?
Don't get on stage at a stand-up club and tell jokes about motherhood, because nobody will think it's funny, but it is hilarious.
Does it dry up?
You hear stuff by people who you love, artists, from when they were like way young, right? And their voices are different, and the poems are different, or the music is different, and it's like, you gotta just like get out of your own way and just catalog and make, because you're a maker.
Like a raisin in the sun, what happens to it? What happens to a dream deferred? Does it fester like a sore? Oh man, I know. We gotta go. I'm gonna finish this long conversation. I wish I could say you got all the highlights, but stay tuned for the PG-13 uncut version in the near future.
Thanks so much for having me. I could chat with you all the time. I don't often get to talk about art and motherhood. It's not something that often people allow me to spew about it, but it's such a big part of who I am. So I just so appreciate you having me here.
You're listening to Moments with Erin Scott